Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Testing Psychologist podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Sharp, licensed psychologist, group practice owner, and private practice coach. Many of y'all know that I have been using therapy notes as our practice EHR for over 10 years now. I've looked at others, and I just keep coming back to therapy notes because they do it all. If you're interested in an EHR for your practice, you can get 2 free months of therapy notes by going to thetestingpsychologist.com/therapy notes and enter the code TESTING.
This episode is brought to you by PAR. PAR offers the spectra indices of psychopathology, a hierarchical, dimensional look at adult psychopathology. The spectra is available for paper and pencil assessment or administration and scoring via PAR iConnect. Learn more at parinc.com/spectra. That's SPECTRA.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Testing Psychologist podcast. I have a fantastic guest for us today. Jana Parker is a licensed educational psychologist and the founder of Mind by Design, a multidisciplinary group practice in Campbell, California, offering psychoed evals, therapeutic services, and educational support. She's also the owner of Empower LEP, which we are talking about today, an initiative that includes a podcast, an online platform designed to inspire and educate licensed educational psychologists and school psychologists who are transitioning from public education to private practice in California and beyond. Through her work, Jana provides practical guidance, encouragement, and inspiration to professionals making that career shift while fostering access to high-quality services for children, teens, young adults, and parents. Jana's got a lot going on. And today we're tackling this topic of licensed educational psychologists and the ways that Jana is empowering them. So I think this is very relevant for folks out there who are considering an LEP licensure or for school psychologists who are considering making the leap into private practice. We talk about the ins and outs of that process. We talk about the unique needs of those folks and the support that they need and many other things. This is action-packed and pretty informative. So if you are an individual who's considering private practice, especially in California as an LEP, this is the episode for you. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Jana Parker from Empower LEP. Jana, hey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, likewise. I was glad to get an introduction through a mutual friend, Scott Robson,
Yes.
who we all love. And yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. You've got a unique little niche going on there with working with LEPs. So
Yes.
we will dive deep into that. But first, I will start with a question that I always start with, which is, why this? Why spend your life in this pursuit?
Oh, gosh. I feel like you're kind of talking about two things. One is like, what is the pursuit of like my actual life's work, I guess, with my practice?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second is, why am I doing Empower LEP? Why am I running that? You want to know the answer to both?
Yeah. I mean, they both occupy a good bit of your time, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, I'm out here in California and I don't know. I was always kind of like a certainty kind of person. I mean, taking it back to childhood, I loved dancing. I was a dancer. I just wanted to perform. So I was very into that. And, but I also realized that might not be a good choice for a life career. And so I was always very into people and why people do what they do. And I always kind of knew I would be a psych major, but I don't know why I thought that, but it was just always something I was into. And then I thought, well, I shouldn't be a dancer. I should be a psychologist. And then my parents said, well, if you don't go to grad school right away, you're never going to go back. So you might as well go. And so I started a clinical PsyD program and just thought, wait a second, like I actually don't want to be a therapist. This is not what I want to do. But I was introduced to school psychology while I was in that program. So I quit the graduate program and thought, okay, like school psychologist, it's kind of like trade school for psychology, like exactly what you're going to do when you finish. And that's really what I wanted. I always wanted something where I was like, I'm great. I'm going to have a school job. I'm going to work 8 to 3. I'm going to have weekends off. I'm not going to have to work holidays. What a great schedule. I'll have pension and benefits. And that felt really good and secure to me. And then lo and behold, I'm an entrepreneur.
Isn't that wild how it just creeps up on you?
Yeah. I mean, I never thought that I would be here, but what I realized about myself as I was going through my career as a school psychologist is I was not the kind of person who was going to be in one place and have a lifetime career in one school district. There are many people who feel very good about that. And I just realized I wasn't that. So every couple of years, I found a different job. I wanted to work with a different kind of population, preschool, high school, elementary, post-secondary. I wanted to try a lot of different things within the field. And I also kind of felt like once I kind of came into a school and cleaned up shop, I got a little bored and I wanted to move on to the next challenge, I guess. And so I realized I had more of an entrepreneurial kind of spirit than I had anticipated. And so I got lucky and ventured out into the private practice world because I was offered an opportunity to work at a private practice clinic that was run by a doctor. And so I got, and in California, and this is something, for your listeners, in California, there is something called licensed educational psychologist. And I always knew as a school psychologist that I would go get that license just because I wanted to have it in my back pocket. And I think a lot of people do that. But I didn't know that I was going to have the opportunity that I got to work in a practice and really not even have to work at finding a way to use that license. And so I can go into that a bit more too, but I learned kind of about private practice working at this clinic. And then I got, I was like, I really want to have a multidisciplinary clinic because as a school psychologist, I felt like I loved having a school team of multidisciplinary educators that I could consult with, assess with, refer to. I loved that collaboration that we had. And so that's what I decided I wanted to do. And so, 10 years later, I own a group practice, a small multidisciplinary practice in California. And we have, educational psychologists and speech pathologists and special educators and tutors. And so that was like my dream is coming true with that. And then I was kind of offered to take over this group called Empower LEP. I was approached to do that because I was doing the work of the LEP, which is like a special, it could be a specialist or it's a specialist level license. So you can be a master's level, specialist level psychologist in California and have this license. Or you can have a doctorate. But a lot of us out here just got our master's because that's like the most popular kind of graduate school program for school psychology in California is a master's level program. So most of us out here have a master's degree, and most of us never thought that we would go into private practice because it's so nice to just work for a school district and for so many reasons. But I was offered the takeover of this business called Empower LEP, which was a perfect blend of my, just kind of like like performer, dancer, coach. I taught aerobics forever. I was a personal trainer. I did all of these kind of like I love leading and coaching people. And I wanted to help, there's this gap between, as we as school psychologists are thinking about making a transition into private practice, there's just it's a huge transition since we've worked in a system for so long and we feel kind of so like golden handcuffs, and like solid, like in that system. And so I thought, yeah, I really want to help guide people through this journey into, I don't know, figuring out what it is that they want to do outside of the system, whether it's a little bit or a lot. And so I run Empower LEP with all my free time.
Right. And with all the free time. Yeah. That's the entrepreneur's curse, I suppose, is that there's always time for something else.
Right.
It's always time. Yeah. As you tell your story, it just strikes me how we have so many paths to do what we like to do. And you've had this thread of coaching and teaching and leading and so forth. And that seems like it was present since you were younger. And it's just I just feel like it's a matter of time before some of those skills like emerge again. And, we're just lucky that we can do it in all these different ways, right? With our degrees and our expertise.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's one of the really powerful and incredible parts of us as people in kind of the mental health and helping professions is we can bring, everybody's different. We bring pieces of ourselves to the work that we do, and it's different. Like everybody's different. It's not cut and dry, or there is no script. We use the strengths that we have to support the kids and the families that we serve, as well as the other professionals that we support.
Right. Well, you said a lot of interesting things. There's a lot of threads to pull on here, but the first one, I just want to let's define licensed educational psychologist. Like, what is this, and where does it fall in the grand scheme of licensure? How does it compare to a clinical psychologist or a school psychologist or a master's level therapist? What is this licensure that y'all have in California?
Great question. And I think that there are some other states that have something similar, but I don't want to speak. I can't speak very informatively about that, so I won't. But I do think that there are some other states that have a license similar. But in California, back in 1970, which is a long time ago, I'm surprised.
Yeah, it used to not be a long time ago, but all of a sudden now it's a long time ago.
Right, right. I'm surprised that California was forging ahead with a license like this in 1970. But it was really born out of the need for more mental health support, educationally related mental health support for kids outside of the school system. And so it is it's through the Board of Behavioral Sciences, which is the Allied Mental Health Professionals Board in California. So just like it's, licensed marriage and family therapist in California for the counseling and therapy, it's the same board has the licensed educational psychologist license. And what it allows for is educationally related services that includes assessment, consultation, advocacy, psychological counseling, anything that's kind of related to education. And so there are several things that we do in my practice. For example, like we do psychoeducational evaluation. We do school neuropsychological evaluation for those of us who have gone and gotten extra certification. We do a lot of parent coaching. I call it kind of a tier 1 advocacy. So we don't do advocacy, but because we have this unique school psychology experience, we have a lot of insight into special education law, how things go in schools. Parents just often have questions about educationally related things, whether they need help at home getting their kids to do their homework, or they're not understanding what their paperwork at school means. How do they navigate this whole special education system? Is that even the right place for them? So we can do a lot of work with families around educationally related questions. And so I think I love it. What I found to be the biggest difference between an evaluation that we're doing in a school versus an evaluation that we're doing in private practice is that in schools, we're really answering the special education question, is the student eligible or not? And
Right.
in private practice, we're answering the questions that the families have about their kids related to their education. And then, of course, whatever else we recommend as well. So kind of back to your question, like we can diagnose out of the DSM, but we're really looking at the conditions that arise out of the evaluations that we're doing that are focused on education, but then also looking at how it affects other areas of their life. So we kind of end up diagnosing the more common things that we're seeing at schools, like ADHD, autism spectrum, learning disabilities, mood, anxiety, depression, developmental disorders, behavioral things, And in schools, we saw all of that and couldn't diagnose it. We saw it, we knew it. We would have to say something like, appear to have characteristics consistent with ADHD, but we couldn't actually say ADHD, but in private practice, you can just be more transparent with families about what it is and what they should do about it. And you don't have the barriers that you had at schools. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So I'm curious, like, are there programs, do the programs specifically like track you for an LAP? Or is that something that you arrive at on your own? I'm just curious, so it's a master's level licensure, right? You said there's some doctoral level clinicians that get this licensure as well?
Yeah,
Or
like
did I
for
misunderstand?
example, so you don't have to be a licensed psychologist. So like, for example, Liz Angoff. Liz Angoff is a PhD and she's a licensed educational psychologist. And, she's amazing, doing amazing things. And, she's not a licensed psychologist, right? But there are also lots of some PhDs, because just again, in California, there aren't that many PhD programs for school psychology. Whereas on the East Coast, I think it's like mostly PhD programs, it seems like, right? So we have a lot of master's level people out here. We do 2 years plus an internship. So it's a 3-year specialist level degree and credential. And then you have to have several years of experience as a school psychologist. So you have to have 3 years in the schools, and then you have to take a big exam before becoming a licensed educational psychologist. So there are requirements. So there's not like a track, but any school psychologist who has the right education and training and supervision can apply and sit for licensure. And so that's so part of what Empower LEP helps people do is pass that test.
Yes, that's a big hoop.
Yeah.
I would imagine. Same
but it's just like the first hoop. It's like the most boring hoop, like pass the test, and then, it's all the rest of figuring out. So again, kind of back to your question, like, how do you know how to do it, right? Like, how do you know how to all of a sudden be in private practice, either seeing private clients, or we do a lot of IEEs. So we do a lot of independent educational evaluations. And in fact, in California, there's case law that supports having only educational psychologists doing these IEEs. So there are some school districts out here who will not allow for a clinical psychologist or a licensed psychologist to do the evaluation. It has to be a school psychologist or a licensed educational psychologist, because they want something similar to what they would get in the educational setting.
I see.
Yeah. And I lost my train of thought, but
so it is.
The question is how do you do it? How do you figure that out? And that's like a big question and a big reason, I think, why people don't do it. And also why, it's kind of a bit like the wild, wild west, like figuring it. And I will say that since COVID, more and more school psychologists are feeling burnt out, and
I could see that.
Working for schools is getting much harder, and people are really starting to like the LEP. When I got my LEP, and when I was kind of working with the board on some of like the test development, this was many years ago. They said the LEP is the most underutilized license of the board in behavioral sciences, because people would get the license but then never do anything with it because they were working in schools, and it's hard to do something different.
Right. Yeah. What is the typical track? I mean, do most folks who get the LEP just go back to work in the schools and it's just sort of an extra credential, or do most of them go to private practice, or do they go somewhere else?
Most of them are just still working in schools and just have it in their back pocket. But it does require like 36 hours of continuing education every 3 years. Like there are, significant professional development requirements, which of course takes money, right? So keeping up your license is expensive, but also thank goodness we have that requirement, because I think we should always be, continuing with that learning curve. But most people just sit on it. And I think that since COVID in the past couple of years, there's been a significant increase in people hungry for change or something different. And so it's really been the perfect time for me to kind of take over and revamp Empower LEP as a community, to be a support and a resource for people who are thinking about either making the shift completely or making it even a little bit.
Right. We talked a little bit about this, but I would love to hear what you think are kind of the unique challenges that face this group, as they are going into private practice.
Let's take a break to hear from a featured partner. Y'all know that I love therapy notes, but I am not the only one. They have a 4.9 out of 5-star rating on Trustpilot.com and Google, which makes them the #1 rated electronic health record system available for mental health folks today. They make billing, scheduling, note-taking, and telehealth all incredibly easy. They also offer custom forms that you can send through the portal. For all the prescribers out there, Therapy Notes is proudly offering e-prescribe as well. And maybe the most important thing for me is that they have live telephone support 7 days a week, so you can actually talk to a real person in a timely manner. If you're trying to switch from another EHR, the transition is incredibly easy. They'll import your demographic data free of charge, so you can get going right away. So if you're curious, or you want to switch, or you need a new EHR, try Therapy Notes for 2 months, absolutely free. You can go to thetestingpsychologist.com/therapy notes and enter the code TESTING. Again, totally free, no strings attached. Check it out and see why everyone is switching to Therapy Notes. The Spectra Indices of Psychopathology provides a hierarchical, dimensional look at adult psychopathology. Decades of research into psychiatric disorders have shown that most diagnoses can be integrated into a few broad dimensions. The Spectra measures 12 clinically important constructs of depression, anxiety, social anxiety, PTSD, alcohol problems, severe aggression, antisocial behavior, drug problems, psychosis, paranoid ideation, manic activation, and grandiose ideation. That's a lot. It organizes them into 3 higher order psychopathology spectra of internalizing, externalizing, and reality impairing. The Spectra is available for paper and pencil assessment or administration and scoring via PAR iConnect. You can learn more at parinc.com/spectra. All right, let's get back to the podcast.
Gosh, so many. I would say like the biggest one is fear. Honestly, the biggest one is fear. It's like fear of the unknown. It's fear of that uncertainty. It's self-doubt. It's that not trusting that they're going to be able to do it. And also like just fear of the unknown, that it's so easy to be in a school job for the consistency and all of the perks that come along with it. You know where your next paycheck is coming from. You know you're going to
Mm-hmm.
have a pension when you retire. You know you have a good benefit package. And you just know that you're going to get paid the same amount all the time, and then you're going to get little incremental raises, hopefully every year. So it's easy. And, when people think about doing something different, like, I don't know about you, but I was not taught anything about business. So there's a whole lot to learn in terms of business logistics. And you do mentoring and coaching like this too. There's all of that. And then there's also this huge clinical piece,
Mm-hmm.
right? So how do you learn how to do that? I think I got super fortunate because I just got hired into a multidisciplinary practice run by a developmental pediatrician. We had other LEPs working alongside me. I had a doctor, I had nurse practitioners, I had other mental health professionals. I had people to learn from and people to consult on my cases and kind of supervise me as I learned, because
That's so helpful.
yeah, I knew what I was seeing and I knew what that was in schools, but that transition into taking what I knew I was seeing and turning it kind of into answering these families' questions, using my assessment data to really answer the questions, and using so much more than just the numbers that are going to establish eligibility, but really looking at the process of what kids were going through while they were doing these assessments with me in my office, talking to their teachers and really trying to conceptualize cases to answer questions, right? Rather than just establish eligibility. That was hard. And it felt like a lot of pressure. Oh my gosh, I'm going to give this kid a clinical diagnosis, right? So I felt fortunate to work alongside people who were helping me do that. And that's kind of, that's what I do for my team here at my practice, but that's also what I do now at Empower LEP, right? So because a lot of these people are going out and doing things on their own, and it is a lot to learn. And if they're not going to be part of a practice and they are going to do it on their own, I think they should reach out for help, and they do, so I think the biggest pieces of why they wouldn't, or the kind of the pain points of people as they are considering this change, are the internal self-doubt, the learning how to run a business, and learning how to think and use assessment data in a more clinical manner than they have been in schools. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I think all those things are relevant for a lot of us as we jump into private practice, but it seems like there's this added layer. I just know when I've consulted with a couple of folks over the years who are master's level psychologists, and, we do have to cross a kind of a big gap of, well, how do you market your services and be competitive with doctoral level clinicians, because for better or for worse, I think the public, there is a bias of sorts, and, folks want a doctor, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, do you run into that, and how do you work through that when you're offering a similar service, without what seems like an equivalent credential?
That's a great question. And I talk to people who are calling all the time, and I talk to people who are trying to learn how to explain their services. And I think there's a lot of imposter syndrome that comes along with this, because we do feel like, oh, am I lesser because I only have a master's degree, or should I go get my doctorate right now? Because, and I mean, I take it back to myself. I have gone through so much professional development. I wish that I had made a decision about a licensure earlier in my career, but it's just not going to happen right now, right? So I've got to be just confident and know that I may not have a doctorate and I may not be a licensed psychologist, but I have a lot of experience and I've done a lot of professional development. And my experience as an educational psychologist is in schools. It's in the trenches. I have seen it all. I have been in it all. And we as school psychologists really need to know how powerful that is and how unique that experience is. And I always say, look, everybody has a different kind of experience and training that leads them to how they're conceptualizing cases, how they're supporting families. And there's no like right or wrong or better or worse, right? It's just different. So when parents call me, I'm not focused on what other people might do. I'm focused on the fact that if this feels like a referral that's coming in because the parent is, concerned about their kid at school, I am the best person for that, right? Like that's how I feel, right? I know other people are probably really great too, but like I have to just like internalize that, right? Like that's my messaging for myself to help me have the confidence, right? Like I've been there, I've been in schools, I know what happens, I can talk to the teachers. Most of the time, I don't even need to do an observation, right? I know by just getting on the phone with that teacher and talking about that actual experience, and I know about, what the behavior with me might look like in a classroom. We have this very specialized lens in which to look at these cases through. And that's what I talk to parents about. That's what sets us apart. It's different, but that different does not mean, lesser, right? Different just means like, this is my lens, right? Through an educational lens. And then the rest, right? It's not like we don't give recommendations for what parents can do at home. But if the referral question is, and it's also like making recommendations like, what does this kid need in order to function in an educational setting that I have so much experience working in? Like, how is this realistically going to work, right? And I think that all the experience that we have as school psychologists really helps us if we stay in this lane, right? If we stay in our lane of what we know, and refer out when it's a different kind of case. Like if I get a very, if somebody just wants to know if their kid has anxiety or or there's some, significant mental health thing going on, like I'm going to refer out. There are some educational psychologists who may feel very comfortable with that, but that's not what we do here with me, right? So, I think it's like really knowing what your scope is and where we fit in, feeling really confident about that and how unique our specialization is, and referring out and knowing when to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, like any of us, right? Like we can only have so many areas of expertise.
Right.
Nice. So I would love to talk about in more detail what Empower LEP actually does. You've touched on it, of course, and given us a little bit of an overview, but I know that you have a lot going on over there, and I would love to hear more about it. What would you say are your main offerings, so to speak?
Yeah. So I think the mission for Empower LEP is to take people along this journey from school psychologist to private practitioner. And again, whatever that means for them, because some people are never going to leave the schools, but doesn't mean they can't do something on the side, part-time private practice. They may even just want to like leave the schools, but do contracting work in different agencies for school districts, right? There are so many possibilities. And I think that, it starts there. It's like, what are the possibilities? And it's kind of like, building a community of collaboration and support of each other, and also providing that guidance in all of those different areas that people get stuck. Those 3 areas, the self-doubt piece, we have mentorship for that. In fact, Scott has done mentorship for my group. He's about to start another one. Cause it's just, that piece of it, it's I bring professionals in because I can't teach everything myself. So I bring professionals in who specialize in different areas. So whether it's, business coaching, whether we're doing like the internal piece, whether we're doing business logistics, whether we're doing, clinical case work, it's a community that offers, guidance and support in all of those areas because we don't have to do it alone. I say Empower LEP is for educational psychologists, but it's really, really also for anybody who's making a shift into private practice, right? I think my focus is on this unique niche because I think there are some, there are some unique aspects to this that are different from doctoral level and licensed psychologists. But there's also a lot of similarities, right? So I think the overarching message is you don't have to do it alone. There is a community here for you.
I think that's so valuable. Yeah, that's the number one thing. I do coaching groups for folks, and it's such a draw to these groups. You probably hear this all the time too, but it's just am I the only one thinking about this stuff? Like, is there anybody else out there who gets it, who understands my life and can help support me in this process? And it's just so validating to have a group of people who are going through it together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I offer, it's always in progress, right? And of course, I want it to go faster than it has. I'm focused on my practice, which is very time consuming, right?
Oh, sure.
I did not realize in running a group practice just how much of me that would take, and so I'm incrementally starting to try to pull myself away from the day-to-day business stuff, right? Because I still want to be, I still want to be a practicing clinician, right? And I do still do that, but finding all the time and having to code switch in my head from okay, business. And now I see this kid and then business. And then, now I see this kid and now I have this phone call. It's a lot. And so Empower LEP, again, I would like it to be going faster, but I'm just incrementally building as I go. But I have a website. It's empowerlep.com. I have a couple of different courses on, first is passing the LEP exam. I have networking and kind of business basics. I've got mentorship opportunities in groups or individually. And I have a podcast. So it's the Empower LEP podcast. And on that podcast, I'm really focusing on people's stories for inspiration. So there are a couple different kinds of episodes I do. I do interviews with people, really hearing their story and the cool things they're doing based on their own specialty areas. So whether they, I interview people who've are building communities online or building AI or people who went into research or test development. Professors, and then other just educational psychologists who are developing their practices in different ways. And I think that for the audience, hearing people's stories helps them go oh, wow, that's cool. I could do that, because I think it's important that we as school psychologists, whether we stay in schools or leave, and really for anybody in this profession, we have to keep our buckets full. And I think that finding the things that really light us up inside helps to fill those buckets. So even if someone was going to stay as a full-time school psychologist, but just do a little something outside, maybe that something is the thing that's going to keep them able to do the good work that they're doing in the schools. I just think we have to keep finding and following the thing that drives our internal purpose, So we do that on the podcast. I also do some solo episodes where I talk about things about business or our scope of practice or just things that come up. So the podcast has been a really special thing to me that I have really enjoyed doing. And then, of course, I have a Facebook group. So it's the Empower LEP Facebook group that anybody's welcome to join. And that's kind of where we have the community. So that's kind of what Empower LEP is all about and what I have to offer. And I
Love
guess,
that. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm biased, of course, but I think that, podcasting and building a community is a pretty amazing thing to do. So
yeah,
I can get on board with that. Yeah. Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm definitely loving it. And you've been a big inspiration too. I mean, I've been listening to you since probably 2019 as I was, I don't know how I found out about you, but I've been listening for a long time and it's been, really helpful, everything that you've shared. So yeah, thank you.
That's incredible. Well, thanks.
You're welcome.
A lot.
Yeah.
That's super cool. Yeah. I was going to ask you, if you had to boil it down, because I know there are folks out there who are listening and hearing parts of themselves here. I mean, do you have, like, who's kind of the ideal person for Empower LEP? What are they doing with their lives? What are they thinking? What are they worried about? Who's your person, your target person?
Yeah. It's aspiring or practicing educational psychologists. It's people who are anywhere from like, I'm thinking about maybe, like I'm a school psychologist and I'm like, I don't know, I need something more. What is it? Is it private practice? What is it? Just anybody who is kind of searching for a bucket filler in their career and not thinking about leaving the career per se, but like what else can they do and how can they find that? And then people who are already in it, who are just like me, like, okay, like people who are beginners and then people who are farther into it, like, how do I do this? Or I'm thinking about changing such and such, or I'm not sure about this next phase I'm going into, right? Because there aren't that many of us doing this out here. But I think that whether you're in California or anywhere across the nation, we all are having questions about both business and clinical practice, like all the time, right? So it's people who are in any phase and people who are just starting to think about it. And I've actually, one of the things that I wanted to share with the listeners is that I have a downloadable that really, it's called My Why, which is a little bit cheesy, but also like that's the whole beginning, right? It's really about figuring out kind of from a lot of different perspectives, like why you would want to do something different and what that could possibly be. And so it's a workbook that just takes people through that journey. It really helps to just uncover those deep personal and professional motivations so that they can grow, whether it's themselves, they want to do group practice, they want to do something online, like what is it? And so I wanted to offer it to your listeners. They just have to go to empowerlep.com/Jeremy and they can get the workbook for free.
Nice. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And I'm eager to, connect with people too. So I can be found at Jana at empowerlep.com. So people can connect with me and they can just join the Facebook group, Empower LEP Facebook group, and listen to the podcast. Cause I would love to I love podcasting. I love hearing people's stories and I love talking to the community, even though a lot of times I feel like I'm just talking to myself, but the feedback that I get's been really great. So I'm looking forward to hopefully growing that a bit more.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, hopefully, folks go check out the podcast, and I'll be on there sometime soon. We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see.
I'm excited for that.
It'll be a lot of fun to turn the tables. Yeah,
absolutely. It puts you in the hot seat.
Right? Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm just coming off testifying this morning, so even hearing you say that, I'm like, well, maybe not. Maybe we'll put that off for a little.
No. We'll wait a little bit.
Podcasts are a lot of fun. It'll be good. Well, Jana, thanks so much for coming on. This is a lot of fun. It's good to connect with you. And I think you got a fantastic resource out there for folks who really need it. So hopefully folks will reach out.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Always grateful to have you here. I hope that you take away some information that you can implement in your practice and in your life. Any resources that we mentioned during the episode will be listed in the show notes. So make sure to check those out. If you like what you hear on the podcast, I would be so grateful if you left a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're a practice owner or aspiring practice owner, I'd invite you to check out the Testing Psychologist mastermind groups. I have mastermind groups at every stage of practice development, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. We have homework, we have accountability, we have support, we have resources. These groups are amazing. We do a lot of work and a lot of connecting. If that sounds interesting to you, you can check out the details at thetestingpsychologist.com/consulting. You can sign up for a pre-group phone call and we will chat and figure out if a group could be a good fit for you. Thanks so much.
The information contained in this podcast and on the Testing Psychologist website are intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no doctor-patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host or guests of this podcast and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of any mental health practitioner or medical provider, please seek one in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please find a supervisor with an expertise that fits your needs.